Nos acompaña el profesor Michael Murray con la ponencia Science, Religion and the John Templeton Foundation. El profesor Michael Murray es vicepresidente ejecutivo de dicha fundación, además de que dirige los programas de filosofía y teología. Para presentarlo está el doctor Andrew Pinsent. Un fuerte aplauso, por favor.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Murray. And Dr. Murray is Senior Visiting Scholar at Franklin and Marshall College. And among his many publications and books over the years, he's particularly been interested in exploring problems of science and religion played out in the wider animal kingdom. His many books include Nature, Red in Tooth and Claw, and The Believing Primate. On more theological topics, he's also written on predestination and election, and on topics connected with the cognitive science of religion. In the United States and many other parts of the world, he's also helping to promote the development of the discipline of analytic theology, which is concerned with analytic philosophers working on more specifically theological topics. With some regret, however, he's increasingly less able to spend time on his own research because he spends much of his time these days helping other people to do their research. And he's now a Vice President of Philosophy and Theology at the John Templeton Foundation. Would you please welcome Dr. Michael Murray?
Thank you very much. I know that we're at the end of a long day and everyone's tired and ready to do something other than sit in a chair and listen to talks. So I will keep this fairly brief. I want to bring greetings on behalf of the John Templeton Foundation and from Dr. Jack and Pina Templeton. If Sir John were still alive, he would love to see this gathering of scholars to engage these crucial topics that were of interest to him and that are part of the vision for the Foundation's work. So if I had my choice, I would be talking about evolution and the cognitive science of religion, but instead the conference organizers asked me to talk a little bit about the Foundation's work and perhaps how it might be a benefit to some of you as you're carrying out your scholarship. One of the things that's been a challenge since I have assumed the role of Executive Vice President at the Foundation is trying to communicate clearly to potential grantees what we do and what we don't do. That is, what we fund and what we don't fund. And unfortunately, we have not done a very good job at explaining to the broader community of scholars exactly what we do and don't fund. In many cases, people know that we fund research in science and religion, but they don't know exactly what the extent of that work is and what other things that we do. So I have been taking the opportunity, when I have an occasion to speak to a group like this, to talk about the bigger vision, to help others understand what we do. Maybe you care about that, maybe you don't. But hopefully some of this information will be beneficial to you if you're thinking about applying for funding to the Foundation. So the John Templeton Foundation was founded in 1987 by the investor and philanthropist Sir John Templeton, and it supports research and programs in 7 major areas. Even many people who've known the Foundation for a long time don't know that we fund in all of these areas, but these are all set out in our charter. So the first area is character development. The second is freedom and free enterprise, which sponsors research and dissemination on issues that have to do with free enterprise and individual liberties. We fund work in family planning, or at least it's part of our charter. We don't actually do it, but it's in our charter, and someday we might do it. We have a section of the charter that we call the Genius Portfolio. But when I talk about it in public, I call it the Nurturing Exceptional Cognitive Talent portion of the portfolio. And it is just what it says. Sir John was interested in those who had exceptional cognitive talents. He wanted us to work with others who wanted to find them and nurture those talents because he thought that was good for the future of humanity. We sponsor work in genetics, not genetics and religion, just genetics. Genetic research that aims to benefit the future of humanity by eliminating future poverty and sickness. That's the way Sir John described it. The sixth point there concerns a religious organization that Sir John was affiliated with during his life. It's a small minority religious group based in the United States, although it has branches all over the world. And I won't say anything more about it now. You can ask me about it sometime if you like, or you can look it up on your mobile phone. But there is an organization called the Unity Church. He belonged to it, and he was inspired by their vision, and he thought we should fund organizations that shared that vision. But at least 60% of our funding every year, and a maximum of 75%, go to that last item up there. And whether you know English or not, that's the most puzzling phrase up there, humility and theology, because Sir John made it up. And it's very difficult to understand what it is. So, and that's the area that's most relevant to the work that you're interested in, I assume. So I'm going to do my best to explain what humility and theology is, as understood by Sir John. So humility and theology really refers to two things: a cluster of content domains, topics, a cluster of topics, and it also refers to a methodology. So let me talk about those in turn. First, the topics, or the content domains. When Sir John talked about theology, his conception of it was very broad, much broader than, say, Thomas Aquinas. And it was driven by an unusual conception of spiritual reality, according to which spirit and nature are intimately connected with one another. I think his views are actually very close to pantheism. Sometimes he described his own views as panentheism. But in any case, his own views were that spirit and nature are closely connected. And because spiritual reality and the natural world were not entirely distinct in his way of thinking, neither are science and theology. For him, science is theology of a certain sort. So theology is integrative because it brings together the resources of various disciplines, but it's also progressive. He was not interested in funding the history of theology or the history of philosophy or pretty much the history of anything else. We fund very little work in the domain of history because he had this progressive vision for scholarship. He wanted it to be forward-looking, perhaps inspired by the past, but looking to discover new things for the future. And discoveries in this domain, the domain of spirit and nature, would yield information that he called new spiritual information. That's his phrase. So let me say a little bit more specifically about these content domains. I think the way we have described this within the foundation for our own purposes, these content domains divide up into three centers of gravity, three focal areas. And the first is scientific research that concerns the fundamental laws, structures, and constituents of reality. So we fund scientific work in cosmology. We fund scientific work on quantum physics. We fund scientific work on relativity. Straight scientific work that aims to understand the basic structures of the natural world. We also fund work on the nature of persons and the nature of personal well-being. So what are persons like? Are there souls? What's the nature of the mind? Those are topics that we fund. And we also fund research on what it means for people to experience well-being. Sir John was very interested, for example, in the connection between religious commitment, spirituality, and medical, physical health. We fund a lot of work in that particular domain. So he was interested in that, and we fund work in that area. And finally, he was interested in progress-oriented theological research. And that's where the science and religion part of our funding comes into play. So most people know the Templeton Foundation for its support of science and religion work, but I hope you can see from this that from our point of view, that represents only a small slice of what we fund. But all of these areas, in his mind, in his way of thinking, were aimed at discovering ultimate spiritual reality. All of those things are about spiritual reality in his mind. So what are sometimes people have asked me, what are examples of concepts or figures from the history of theology, philosophy, and science that represent these areas? So here are a few examples. With respect to fundamental constituents of reality, it would include figures as wide-ranging as Plato, Newton, Spinoza, Darwin, Einstein, Bohr and Heisenberg, and so on. So it's not just empirical scientific work. If Plato were alive today and sent a proposal into the foundation, I think we would fund it. Second was persons and their well-being. And here again, the examples are wide-ranging, from Alasdair MacIntyre and Charles Taylor to the Buddha and Aristotle. And then for the third example, theological domains, again, Plato appears, Confucius, the Hebrews and their conception, perhaps novel in human history, of monotheism, St. Teresa, Whitehead. I think all of these figures and their work, and those concepts in particular, illustrate that particular area that we're interested in funding. But it also concerns a methodology. Remember, I said it's topics and a methodology. So what's the methodology? Well, first of all, contrary to the claims of many of our critics, it's opposed to dogmatism or unreflective assumptions. Those who come to a research project and already know the right answer, we don't want to fund them. We want people who are looking for the right answers. It's typically interdisciplinary. And by that, I mean it seeks to integrate novel sources of data or information into domains where that sort of information is underutilized. So it's bringing resources from sociology, psychology, other empirical sciences into theology and philosophy. And vice versa. It's trying to bring the insights from, I call them up here, non-empirical disciplines, philosophy and theology, into the sciences. What can what we know from theology and philosophy tell us about where we should be looking for new discoveries in the sciences? Anything at all? Some might think not. But we're willing to look, and we're willing to fund research that wants to engage in work of that sort. But another way of looking at Sir John's interests, I think, is illustrated by a jigsaw puzzle. So you might think of the pieces of the puzzle up there. The extant pieces are what we currently know about reality, bits of disconnected information that make up the puzzle as a whole. And while some pieces of the puzzle connect for us, we have an incomplete picture at this point. Sir John thought that we knew less than 1% of what there is to know about ultimate reality. And as further pieces begin to fall into place, in his view, the number of new pieces grows infinitely. We see the little bits that we have now, but we don't even understand fully the boundaries. But in his view, progress was best made by working on what we now think of as the boundary issues. So we're always looking for people who are doing something different, interesting, innovative, not likely to be funded by traditional sources. And his model was that when we fill out those boundary pieces, like when we put together a jigsaw puzzle, filling in the pieces in the middle is a lot easier. I should say that this model of thinking about new spiritual information has certain assumptions behind it. First of all, it has an assumption that spiritual information is real and that it can be discovered. So many naturalists would not sign on to the vision here because they think the notion of spiritual information is bankrupt or false. But the presumption of the foundation and its work is that spiritual information is real and that human beings have the capacity to discover it. And while we're looking for innovative, progressive thoughts and ideas, the goal is not to try to overthrow traditional theology. In fact, it's to build on it. And we're looking to work with those who are embedded within specific theological traditions to help them advance their thinking as they integrate these new novel sources of information. Okay, so that's the theoretical underpinnings for the Foundation's work. Now let's get down to how grants are given out. How does the money get out? So we have two primary ways of dispersing funds. Because of the influx of funds from the donor's estate, Sir John passed away in 2008, for those of you who don't know, we will very soon have an endowment of about $3 billion. And because of the Internal Revenue Service, that means we have to give away about $175 million a year. And we do that in two ways. First of all, by an open submission process, where any of you or anyone in the world who has a web browser can submit a request for funds from the Templeton Foundation. And they do. People from all over the world who have a web browser will sign on and send in a request for funds. But we also produce a number of internally generated initiatives. Those come from my staff at the foundation, who are interacting with people like you and other people all over the world, looking for interesting ideas that we might develop on a bigger scale. So let me say something about each of these. So first of all, for the open submission proposals, there's the URL. That's where you go, and you'll find the instructions for how you can apply for funding. Every year, twice a year, we have the opportunity for individuals to request funds for research. It's a two-step process. The first step, you submit a fairly brief pre-proposal, and if that's accepted, we invite you to submit a full proposal. So it's a minimum amount of work at the beginning, and if we invite the full proposal, your odds of being funded are fairly high, and it'll be more work, but more likely to pay off. We receive a little over 1,000 pre-proposals each cycle, so about 2,000 per year, and we invite something on the order of 130 proposals each cycle, so 260 total each year that we invite. Then there are internally developed initiatives, and again, as I mentioned, these are developed typically by our staff. They're typically large-scale projects. They bring together lots of different disciplines, and they're specifically targeted to meeting some internal goals that we've set for ourselves. So I'm going to illustrate, just tell you about some of those, give you some ideas, because perhaps it will inspire you to have an idea on such a large scale. And if you have such an idea and you want to submit it, that would be fantastic, because then my staff can take a rest. So here's one example. We recently funded a project that's being run at Florida State University on the topic of free will and science. Some of you are familiar with the issues here. There are psychologists and neuroscientists who argue that the data from the sciences shows us that free will is an illusion. Those in the philosophical community think that's incorrect. Many of them do, at any rate. And so what we were trying to do is to bring the scientists and the philosophers together by offering them grants that allowed them to pursue their individual work and to work together collaboratively. And I will say, I think so far, early signs are that it's been very successful. Just recently, this grant was covered in Nature. And I don't know if you can read the little text at the bottom, but what it says is, scientists think they can prove free will is an illusion. Philosophers are urging them to think again. And that was in the journal Nature. So for those of us who are philosophers, it's an encouraging sign to see that some of the scientists think this is information worth taking seriously, and it's encouragement to us at the foundation. Another project we've just funded is, we call it the Character Project. It's based at Wake Forest University. And it similarly is bringing together social psychologists, personality psychologists, philosophers, and theologians to look at the notion of character. And for those of you who don't know, the notion of character in psychology has not fared well in recent years. It's very recently begun to make a recovery. But in the philosophical world, the notion of character is discussed by everyone. And so we noticed that there was a bit of a tension here between what the scientists were saying about character, what the philosophers were saying about character, and we thought these two groups needed to talk to each other. So we were willing to make a fairly significant investment to make this happen. And I'd encourage you to look at the website called The Character Project. There are a lot of resources listed there for scholars who are interested in doing research in this field. Just recently, just a few months ago, we funded a project on a topic that we call intellectual humility. And this is over $5 million project that will be run at Fuller Seminary. And the goal of this project is to look at ways in which human beings are naturally disposed to intellectual arrogance. Why do we overestimate the strength of our opinions? Why do we think we have better evidence for things that we do? And are there evolutionary reasons why we do that? I think there's some good indications that there are. This is the first phase of a three-phase project that will then look at what the implications are for interreligious dialogue, for dogmatism, for religious pluralism, and issues like that. But it will be done in a way that's sensitive to the scientific data. Here are some other projects that are in development right now. We are beginning a project that will look at the topic of miracles. A lot of dialogue on this topic in the science and religion community, sometimes somewhat theologically naive, we believe. We have a project that's in the pipeline right now on immortality that I think will even include an invitation for proposals for people who want to do empirical work on immortality. Is that crazy? Maybe, but we're willing to look at some crazy things. The science of cognitive control. How do we emotionally regulate? What can neuroscience tell us about that in psychology, and what are the implications for ethics? Philosophy of cosmology is an area where we hope to approve a proposal maybe in a couple days. The physics of emergence. We will have a call for proposals this spring that is open to everyone in the physics of emergence. What's life? The science of information, the notion of purpose in biology, the connections between chance and providence. These are all projects that we have currently in development. We also fund projects that are aimed at getting the message out about the research that we fund. So some of you have seen versions of a program that we call Science for Ministry. These give grants to theological schools, Bible colleges, seminaries, as well as to individual congregations who want to spawn conversations about scientific issues. We'll have a new call for proposals coming out in the spring that you might be interested in. We fund translation work. We fund website projects. Some of you are familiar with the BioLogos project that aims to engage issues at the intersection of faith and evolution. There's a picture of the front page of that website from today. We also sponsor films and videos and social networking. Someone this morning asked, why doesn't the John Templeton Foundation start a television network? I think that's what you were asking. A television network in Spanish that deals with these sorts of issues in the way National Geographic does. Send me the proposal. Send the proposal. But we do fund films. Some of you are familiar with this project, the Test of Faith project from Faraday, which, by the way, is available in Spanish, this film, and the resources are available in Spanish. You can go to the website and find that. We also fund work for popular books, essay prizes, curriculum development, and any other thing that you can come up with that fits our vision. So I hope this has been useful to you. We can take a few minutes now if you've got questions about things that we do or don't do. This probably isn't the best forum for you to ask me about your individual project. But I will be around through Friday morning, and if you have ideas that you'd like to discuss, by all means, introduce yourself, and we can talk through what you're thinking about. So thank you for your patience at the end of a long day, and I hope we have an opportunity to meet with you individually. Thanks.